Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone for this webinar, special edition webinar series on recommendation on historic urban landscape, opportunities, challenges, and way forward. This webinar is organized to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the HUL recommendation by UNESCO. It's organized by UNESCO-New Delhi, NIUA, National Institute of Urban Affairs of India, in cooperation with Metropolis and Center for Heritage Conservation, CEPT Research and Development Foundation. I'm Gis Database. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Heritage Conservation, and I will be moderating the first session of this webinar series. We have had two other webinars earlier on. This is the third session. The first session of this special edition presented a few model cases of the application of UNESCO historic urban landscape from across the world, and on the basis of which urban planners, architects, and municipalities from India, along with academics and other stakeholders, discussed various opportunities, challenges, and way forward. In the session 2, we shed light on the role of heritage in sustainable urban development through Indian examples and integrating urban heritage in different development missions. And we had some fantastic discussions related to how heritage can be linked to poverty, quality of life, alleviation of poverty, quality of life, sustainable development goals, etc., etc. Today, we are presenting webinar 3. The theme of the webinar 3 is future of historic towns and the relevance of HUL approach in different towns and the possibilities of engaging with this approach in different towns. In the first session, we have 4 cases that are going to be presented. The first one is of the Shekhawati region, Rajasthan, presented by Urvashi Srivastav. She is the principal conservation architect, Shrijan Sanskaran. We have Penang, Georgetown, Malaysia. Francisco Sirao, professor, will be presenting that. He's from Marakan Development Network for Historic Cities program. We have Old Dhaka, Bangladesh, presented by Dr. Sharif Imon. He's the president of ECOMOS Bangladesh. And we have Serampur being presented by Binte Wolf, who's the project head of Serampur Initiative. In the interest of saving time, we will be putting the details of each of these presenters in the chat box, detailed bio of each of these presenters in the chat box. Today, we hope to we follow these presentations with certain discussions with Indian and international discussions reflecting upon many of these presentations that Juni Han will be moderating. So without delaying the conversation further, I give the floor to Urvashi, who will be presenting her works and her reflections on Shekhawati region. I request all presenters to please keep to time of 15 minutes. If you exceed 15 minutes, I will take the liberty of stopping you or possibly nagging you to stop your presentation. So over to you, Urvashi.
On the onset, I would like to thank UNESCO, NIUA, Metropolis, and CEPT University for this opportunity to talk about historic urban landscapes. Today, I'm going to talk about the challenges of conserving unprotected urban heritage in the context of the historic towns in Shekhawati. I am a principal conservation architect and practice by the name of Shrijan Sankaran. So I will begin my presentation by briefly introducing everyone to the Shekhawati region. Shekhawati is a unique historic urban landscape. More than an administrative boundary, it is actually a socio-political and cultural construct. It is a network of around more than 30 heritage towns and villages, with an unestimated number of painted heritage properties. The entire region is spread over 3 districts of Jhunjhunu, Sikar, and Churu in the state of Rajasthan in India. And this area is roughly around, approximately 30,000 square kilometers. So this is a scale of, opportunities and challenges that we are going to talk about today. Traditionally, Shekhawati was just comprising of 2 districts, Jhunjhunu and Sikar, and the 3rd district, Churu, was always part of the princely state of Bikaner. So Shekhawati is a land of painted Havelis, and these Havelis and mansions, which are the painted, heritage properties, are the reason why this region has come on the center stage of tourism world over. So these Havelis were majorly built during 1850s to 1930s. These Havelis are very rich in terms of their design and planning. Very rich palette of ornate architectural elements and frescoes. A wide range of traditional construction techniques, skills, and materials has been used to construct these Havelis. So practically, I see Shekhawati as a lab for designers and young architects to learn, the idea of sustainability, building with nature, and using local resources. But Shekhawati is much more than that. Principally, the two main towns in the region are Navalgarh and Mandava. These are the towns which are the most visited towns in the region. But Shekhawati is not just about these two towns. It is a much larger region. Most of the towns in Shekhawati have generic commonalities. Now, I will just briefly introduce you to the concept of a planning and design of Shekhawati towns because then the problems also are generic in that sense. So most of the towns have an organic pattern of growth with narrow winding streets punctuated by chalks and open spaces. The fort usually is the center of the town, and the town is enclosed by fortification walls, bastions, and gateways. And the temple of the principal deity Gopinath Ji is always close to the fort. The main street primarily functions as a commercial spine. The streets are mostly narrow and built to edge. The residential neighborhoods are organized around the fort, and a clear social hierarchy is evident in terms of the spatial organization. The economic status is reflected in the built heritage structures and other buildings. Social, religious, and recreation institutions always formed a very integral part of the urban fabric. The natural topography of the region was, utilized to the maximum to create a network of water harvesting structures, which were basically the lifeline of these towns. So now Shekhawati is a rich and varied, a region with a variety of, intangible and tangible heritage assets. The entire region is an open-air art gallery, and it can boast of the largest concentration of rare painted structures anywhere in the world. Nowhere in the world will you find a collection of such beautifully painted buildings. And I would just like to highlight that, these paintings are not paintings on dry plaster surfaces. These are fresco buono. These are not fresco secco. Only the fresco buono are there on the exterior walls, and the fresco secco is only confined to the interiors of these Havelis. And painting these frescoes is a very time-consuming task. So you can imagine the immensity of the problem and the opportunities that are there in this region. There is a rich palette of, cultural heritage assets, diverse historic buildings. So the buildings are not just Havelis. There are many more other typologies of buildings which this region is famous for. There is a distinct historic layering of cultural and natural values, which are, very deeply intertwined. Shekhawati is a unique, region which has a unique values and significance. It's a historic urban landscape, not just an ensemble of buildings or historic center. The urban morphology and the architectural character is based on sustainable planning principles, which were a unique and distinctive response to the local culture, economy, geography. The trade in the region was a primary reason why this collection of towns actually came up. The heritage in this region is unique. It offers diversity of experiences and has significant cultural tourism potential. As you can see in the two graphs, which talk about four towns in Shekhawati, Navalgarh, Mandava, Jhunjhunu, and Bisau, and you can clearly see that there is enough substantial tourism potential in each of these towns, which are the major towns in the region. And apart from that, you can also see across typologies, Havelis are the main attraction, which is why people from all over the world visit this region. So this unique historic urban landscape has outstanding universal value, which needs to be recognized as a world heritage. But Shekhawati is a steadily fading paradise. There is deliberate demolition trend to reclaim land inside the historic core, as is the case with many such similar historic cities. So the Havelis are deliberately being demolished. The antique building material is being salvaged from these properties and sold. This is a region where unprotected historic buildings are at constant risk. There are many reasons why this region of such rich cultural heritage and built heritage is gradually decaying. One of the main reasons are that there is conversion of residential to commercial. Most of these Havelis are underutilized, and often they are being converted into shops. There is insensitive insertion of infrastructure both in the city as well as within these heritage properties. There is inadequate traffic management. These streets were never designed for such large format heavy vehicles, but unfortunately things have changed and modern transport systems need to be, sensitively planned in these historic towns. There is subdivision of heritage properties. I'll talk about the very unique pattern of ownership in this region. And because of that, it has resulted in the subdivision of heritage properties. There is indiscriminate graffiti and advertisements on these walls. There is theft of antique building components. There is lack of repair and maintenance works. And there are largely, bad conservation practices, which are gradually eroding all these beautiful frescoes from the walls of heritage buildings in the region. So now the question comes to how do we manage such a complex historic urban landscape? Now, there are many stories, there are many ways in which the story of Shekhawati can be told. But today I'll be talking about the story of interventions in Shekhawati. We will talk about how the understanding of the region has grown over the years and what interventions have taken place. In 2007, cognizant of significance of the unique heritage resources of Shekhawati, the government of Rajasthan initiated a project to protect and conserve and present the heritage in this region. As per that project, development plans for 14 heritage towns and 3 districts were prepared. A large number of heritage properties were listed, somewhere around 3,000 properties. But that's not enough. There are several other towns. There are many more heritage properties which are still unlisted. So primarily, this objective was to identify projects in terms of infrastructure, in terms of adaptive reuse, and try to develop tourism in some manner. But none of these, recommendations actually got translated into the ground. They were basically only limited to, provision of infrastructure, like, construction of roads, signages, and things like that. But this was the point that I want to highlight here is that the process was only very, a government approach to the whole, planning of conservation in the area. There was no dialogue. There was no communication with the local stakeholders. So we are moving from apathy to the region to actually some kind of a basic preliminary development planning. Next, in 2008, UNESCO came up with a very unique concept of Indian Heritage Passport Program. And under that, Shekhawati was, one of the areas which was highlighted as an important secondary itinerary in the tourism circuit. And the whole idea was to develop a very comprehensive vision of the region, because initially the projects was being taken by 3 consultants, and the concept, there was no unified concept for the project. But this time the idea was to come up with a unified and comprehensive vision, and several strategic actions were identified as part of this initiative. And for the first time, it was realized that there are 4 main stakeholders which are important for managing such a complex urban landscape. They are the government, the owners, the residents, the craftsmen, the visitors, and the tourism industry. So there were actions that were recommended were like recognition of Shekhawati as a unique cultural landscape, setting up of a regional management authority, integrating conservation with planning, safeguarding and managing heritage resources, streamlining coordination among stakeholders, community-wide heritage awareness campaign, incentives and concessions for conservation, adaptive use as a strategic option, revival of traditional crafts and skills, and development of heritage-based tourism. But this document was primarily a recommendatory document and nothing much happened on the ground. But the idea was to bring the focus and attention of the government to the fact that there has to be a comprehensive vision for the Shekhawati region. Next, in my personal capacity, in the year 2010, I was awarded a fellowship by the Department of Science and Technology. This was a 3-year project. And this time, my personal initiative was to bring the attention and empower the owners and residents in the craftsmen, because nobody was paying attention to their genuine day-to-day problems. So through this research project, the idea was to bring attention to preventive conservation and management. So as part of the research project, there was, the idea was to document traditional knowledge of construction, scientifically validate traditional techniques, encourage continuity of traditional building practices, promote authentic repair of traditional buildings, extend technical help to owners for repair, make available historic materials and tools. So as part of this research program, 3-year-long research program, a number of awareness generation workshops were organized by me. Research publications were made available to the owners, the local stakeholders, in terms of Haveli owner, maintenance manual. And also as part of the research project, a hands-on training of 45 craftsmen was undertaken. And the findings of the research were communicated to the stakeholders on the ground. Next, in 2017, again, the whole idea of heritage and conservation in Shekhawati was revived. The World Bank and Cities Alliance and NIUA actually were providing technical assistance to the Rajasthan government as part of the Rajasthan State Heritage Program. And for the first time, 2 towns, Jodhpur and Nawalgarh, in Navalgarh in Shekhawati was selected for the preparation of a heritage management plan. Now, this is where the whole idea of the historic urban landscape approach comes into its fullness, and the whole process was participatory, based on participatory planning, and very intensive stakeholder consultations were organized with owners, with craftsmen, with women from the local community, visitors, and the tourism industry, as well as the local municipal body. And the heritage management plan was prepared, and the highlights were comprehensive heritage protection, heritage sensitive infrastructure development, heritage-linked local economic development, inclusive community-linked heritage management, integration of heritage assets with tourism, and adaptive use of heritage assets. So the idea was to comprehensively map all the heritage properties, both tangible and intangible, and work out ways. So a special toolkit was devised to integrate urban heritage into the city development framework, and also provide guidelines for people for undertaking repair and maintenance works, or even the construction of new buildings in the context of heritage properties. As part of the same project, there was the phase 2 comprised of designing a heritage trail and facade redevelopment of 30 heritage properties in the same town. And again, through participatory heritage mapping, the list of tangible heritage assets and intangible heritage assets was prepared with the participation of the, a unique concept of participatory heritage appraisal was undertaken with the local community. And the idea was to weave all these assets with the local economic development of the community. And this was done through developing a proper business plan for the entire, the heritage trail and the walk which was being developed, by establishing partnerships and, efficient management frameworks. And through the entire process, social heritage and environmental screening was undertaken as per the World Bank guidelines. So I'm just trying to give you an idea how the concept of urban concept and understanding of the historic urban landscape has grown over through these interventions which have been largely planned, and why in the next slides I will be telling you why these interventions could not be materialized on the ground. In 2019, in my personal capacity, through an NGO called CATS, which I am part of, we started adaptive use of one of the rallies, and we converted it into a Shekhawati Heritage Hub. The idea was to be present on the ground and to be able to bring at least 3 stakeholders from the Shekhawati region on a common platform. So these are the owners, the craftsmen, and the visitors together to basically do some grassroots level initiatives. The idea was to preserve, interpret, and valorize cultural heritage, enrich visitor experience, because so far there was no facility like a interpretation center or anything else that was available on the ground to communicate with the local people. We also wanted to develop this as a heritage house. We would offer technical assistance to local people, because repair and maintenance is a continuous cycle and a process. And these things cannot be undertaken under government projects. So these have to be done basically at the grassroots level. So the highlights of this center are, we have developed a gallery of Shekhawati arts and crafts, and the screen of awareness generation documentary film for 11 minutes in the center. But unfortunately, because of this pandemic situation, the activities of the center had to be stopped. But we hope to resume in the near future. And we hope to be able to organize, special talks on heritage, have live demonstration of traditional crafts, organize traditional skill training workshops, and offer technical support to Haveli owners, as well as facilitate research programs for students. So this has been the story of interventions over the years, starting from 2007 to 2019 in Shekhawati. And now I will tell you about, what are the challenges and roadblocks that remain despite such high level of planning and project development. So there are these 4 main roadblocks that I would say. The ownership pattern in Shekhawati is very unique. The maximum heritage properties are in private ownership, as you can see in the graph above. And there are issues of multiple ownership, because there is a tradition in Shekhawati that the Marwari family, divides the property amongst all the heirs. So subsequently, over the years, several of these properties have come to be owned by 50 or 60, property, owners. Each one, getting one share of one room in the whole mansion. So this is a very tricky issue. And also there are issues of disputed ownership. There are significant number of absentee owners. And in that case, the caretakers are taking care of the property, but these caretakers are not sensitive and they do not have the resources for repair and maintenance works. Also, the next roadblock is the legal protection. There is lack of legal protection for privately owned heritage properties in the region. None of the heritage properties are preserved. Then the third roadblock.
Yeah. Urvashi, I'll have to request you to wind up.
Yeah. So these are major roadblocks. The tourism in the region is very limited. It is a one-day tourism. So the idea is
connection.
Sorry. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, now you are. So I request you to now conclude.
Yeah, I'm doing that. So I'll just briefly, highlight that the historic urban landscape approach gives them an opportunity to bring together local economic development, conservation, both environment and urban conservation and tourism together. And there are certain strengths in the approach, but there are ground realities and there are possibilities which need to be looked into. Government interventions need to be dovetailed with community action. So I see the entire process not as a project, but as a process. So conservation in Shekhawati has to be process-based, otherwise nothing will work on the ground and none of these initiatives will last. The challenges are far too many. I'll quickly just draw your attention to one of the projects. This was one of the wells which was identified under the World Bank project. But unfortunately, since 2019, we find that, the project on the ground never happened. But the community got together, mobilized their resources, and, with their own understanding of conservation, they have tried to, the important idea is that they really value these properties, but they do not have the right means to be able to conserve these properties. So the journey, I feel, is very arduous and time is running out for Shekhawati. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. That was it was really heartening to see all your individual efforts, and congratulations for all the efforts that you've put in. I think your presentation also brings out it links to some of the discussions that we had last time, which was about how while there are experts and while there are processes sometime in place on site, it is the dovetailing it with the urban local bodies' efforts is what is needed, and which you demonstrated through Shekhawati quite well. And also you very well dovetailed the historic urban landscape approach, its approach towards its approach towards innovation, its approach towards change. And I think all that is very well reflected in your presentation as well. I'm sure in the discussion we will come back to some of the things that you've talked about. Thank you very much. We now go to Professor Francisco Serravo. He will be presenting initiatives in Penang, Georgetown, Malaysia. Over to you, Professor Serravo. Professor Serravo, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just saying thank you for this opportunity to present some of the work we are carrying out in Penang, Malaysia, through a joint effort by Think City and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. I would be going relatively fast to stay within the time limits that have been set up. Penang, Penang was founded in 1786, so it's a relatively recent town, and was part of the the general conglomeration of cities of the Straits settlements, and remained under British administration up to the independence, which took place in 1973. But just to frame the issue in a sort of larger context, we're essentially living through two different types of issues and problems. In most Western countries, historic areas suffer from increasing commercialization, traffic, and social transformation, whereas in other countries where I've mostly been working, cities are affected by abandonment, severe damage, lack of investment, uncontrolled development. Dr. Urvashi Srinivasa explained very well in the case of Rajasthan some of the issues that prevail in many of these contexts, and that's really what we are often dealing with. In the case of Georgetown, we have a mixed picture. Some of the heritage is relatively well preserved. Other parts of it are under threat or definitely in very poor condition. UNESCO named Penang, rather Georgetown, the center of Penang, heritage site, and the three aspects that were highlighted were its multicultural aspects that prevail throughout the town, the different influences, Malay, Chinese, Indian, and British, that have been interacting for more than 200 years. A very rich wealth of intangible heritage because of the various influences that have been overlapping each other in the town, and that has to do with languages, dances, costumes, arts, and so on. And intangible heritage. Penang is certainly the town that contains the largest range of shopfront houses in all of East and South Asia, which have mostly disappeared in places like Singapore or Hong Kong. The Penang is interesting because it's very close to fast-growing economies. It totals 900 million people, which is, I mean, in the region, the South East region of Asia. And so it's a sizable number of people, approximately double the total population of Europe. And before the COVID emergency, tourist visitation was estimated at an increase of 15% per year. Now, all of these conditions could indeed bring up opportunities, and very sure you're familiar with these European cases that have been indeed very, very successful in making the best of their cultural heritage. And they've essentially combined strong political will with dedicated planning entities, a good business plan, and quality in planning and architecture. And essentially, all of these cities have tried to merge conservation and development in a single strategy of urban regeneration that combines conservation of heritage assets with quality urban development by enhancing the sense of place, economic development, and bringing together sustainable options for the communities involved. We argued when we started preparing the plan for Penang that it was important to implement a robust program combining cultural and economic activities. Just to give you a very briefly history of our engagement, we started in 2013, so it's already a sizable number of years we've been here. And the centerpiece of this was the preparation of a high-level strategic master plan and the development of a number of framework plans, which I will show you in a moment. The elements of the strategic master plan were a very in-depth analysis of the conditions and elements that constituted the urban heritage of the place. We put together a number of heritage plans, general plans that were part of the adoption of the plan eventually, and a series of schematic area plans accompanied by planning briefs and implementation programs. In 2015, we created a corporation, the Georgetown Conservation and Development Corporation, that worked with the local and state authorities to harmonize conservation and development and provide technical support for the implementation of these various activities. Here you see the signing of the agreement in October of 2015. These are some of the general documents we put together: a special area plan, which utilizes the old British sort of regulations to adapt them to a heritage context, because there were no heritage precedents in Malaysia in terms of building complete conservation plans, and then strategic master plans and special documents for the public areas. So essentially, all of these components came together by general conservation plans, urban frameworks, open space improvements, building restoration, reuse, and special museums activities. I'll go very rapidly through these images. These are, this is the GIS database that we put together. We, of course, started from the framework that was based on the UNESCO Special Area Plan and its World Heritage Site status. These are the limits of the historic area, about 110 hectares with 150 hectares of buffer zone. In fact, the buffer zone contains many interesting buildings that we advocate inclusion in the main sort of heritage area. Detailed heritage land use plan, pedestrian and open space systems that have been scrutinized and put together in a comprehensive plan. A number of conservation and development measures, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then the identification of the urban frameworks. And we've been going through each of these urban frameworks in a systematic way through various initiatives. And our area of greatest attention has been the North Sea front, the Esplanade, with various projects. You see them here in their complete interrelationship. These are some of the specific problems: the Esplanade, improvements to the drainage, the construction of the new seawall, and a number of particular historic buildings that are now under restoration. These are some historic images. These are some of the initial planning suggestions, and these are now being implemented with the use of traditional materials and technologies. This is the new seawall that has been built. The old one was certainly worthy of attention, but unfortunately failing. And we have substituted it with a traditional gravity wall system that makes use of traditional technologies. So there's been a great deal of experimentation and learning to the recovery of traditional construction systems, including, as you can see, the old use of the granite traditional building techniques. This is a garden we're trying now to implement to complement the existing new seawall and seawall promenade development. Essentially, we've started from analyzing the precedents, historic precedents, and gradually building in continuity with them, eliminating previous configurations that were not in line with traditional technologies and uses, and substituting them with elements that are in continuity with the town's tradition. And I will show you the case. These are just a series of images showing what is happening at the moment. This is the old seawall that we are in the process of restoring. This is one of the gardens before intervention. This is the first case of complete restoration of an historic garden in Malaysia. And we've been following the dictates of the Florence Charter of 1981. Here is the, we were fortunate enough to find the old plans for this particular garden, and it has been now restored in its complete former status by examining the old plans and bringing back traditional elements, including, of course, the preservation of the trees and elements that were still in some cases present, and the central fountain, which we've restored from its poor condition. This is one of the main avenues that we've been bringing back to their previous condition. This is how it was. And these are some of the historic elements that we've been researching and bringing back. This is one of the detailed plans we have developed. And these are some of the preliminary views. And this is finally the completed project. It really indeed makes use of the traditional element as research from historical sources and brought together in the actual implementation. The East Sea Front is another example of making use of old views and images to bring back the continuity of the original conditions. And here are some of the studies we carried out. And this is now under discussion, but we put together a number of proposals that reflect all the elements that are still there, all the old go-downs, complemented by new elements that reestablish certain street edges that were no longer there as a result of bombing that took place during World War II.
Professor Savaro, I will have to request you to conclude now, to wind up.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I will conclude in a second. Essentially, our key lessons are consolidate a comprehensive, holistic plan for the area, not to proceed haphazardly through separate and unrelated intervention, but try to merge together, merge all of them together in a single vision for the future of the town, seek partnerships and public consultations, set up pilot initiatives and experiments, capacity building and training to identify the best solutions, apply, of course, traditional principles of conservation, but exploring innovations where necessary, and choose procurement systems that are flexible and can be controlled at all stages. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Saravo. It was indeed a pleasure to listen to you, and especially the whole two-part approach that you had, where you started with the frameworks and then how those frameworks influenced individual project. It was, I think, a lesson in urban conservation in itself. Thank you again, and we will come back to you with some discussion points when we go to the panel discussion. I now invite Dr. Imam to present his lessons in Old Dhaka, Bangladesh. Over to you, Dr. Imam.
All right, is it okay now?
Yeah.
All right. So I'd like to thank UNESCO-New Delhi office for inviting me to this event. I will be presenting Old Dhaka, not as a solution to a problem, but rather demonstrate the complexity of the issues, and also to see how relevant HUL approach is in a situation like in Old Dhaka. So Old Dhaka is, of course, it's a part of a capital city, Dhaka, which is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. It's located in the middle of the city, but I would like to also draw your attention to the two rivers that flows through Bangladesh and meets in one point. Two of the largest rivers, Brahmaputra and Ganges, both meet meets in the middle of the country. And Dhaka is situated just to the north of the combined river that flows into the Bay of Bengal. So the capital Dhaka is, apart from those major rivers, is also surrounded by rivers. In this case, if you look at the dark parts on the right-hand side, you can see that on all sides there are these rivers that connects to that bigger river. So the river has been one of the lifelines of the city, and has a huge influence on not just on the old part of the city, but how the city.
Dr. Iman, your slides are not moving.
So I was just saying about the two major rivers that meet in the middle of Bangladesh and flows into the Bay of Bengal, and Dhaka is situated just to the north of that, the combined river. So if you look closely, then you can see that there are actually rivers surrounding the city. And the old part of the city, which is the historic core of Dhaka, is actually situated on the northern bank of that river. It's called Buriganga. Old Dhaka, if you look at these a key map, it's just to the located on the southern part of the city, and the river is here. There are basically three administrative, we call Thana, or it's a police station area. So it's that's normally administratively considered Old Dhaka. But in fact, over the years, because of transformation of the city, the notion of Old Dhaka has changed. It's not just limited to this area, but it's also expanded northward. So this is how it's perceived, in the minds of every people in Dhaka. Now, to discuss Old Dhaka, it's important to discuss the history because it has gone through ups and downs. Sometimes it became a capital city, sometimes it's just a provincial town, sometimes it's just a trading port. So the earliest recorded historical record that we can find is as a 1454 inscription, stone inscription in a mosque in Dhaka, which is located in the old part now. But then it got into prominence in 1608 when it became the Mughal capital of Bengal. And soon after that, Dhaka grew very fast, although it is confined to the river area, just river banks. But it became a major trading hub. It's not just in Bengal, but it's also in South Asia. It became one of the most prosperous cities. Textile was one of the most important industries, but as you can see, because of its strategic location, it was also a very important trading hub. But then with the East India Company winning the Battle of the Buxar in 1764, they got control of Dhaka. And then at the same time, just before that, actually, the capital of Bengal was shifted from Dhaka to Murshidabad. So, and that started the decline of Dhaka. At one point, Dhaka's population was close to 1 million. But then rapidly declined, all these industries declined because of the policies that imposed by the East India Company. Dhaka became a ruined city. So if you look at this picture, and I'll show you also compare with the more recent pictures. This is in 1823, and it says it's a beautiful city of ruins. This is how it was described in the 19th century. And then happened the partition of Bengal, 1905, and then Dhaka became the capital of East Bengal. And there are a lot of new developments happened, and then the expansion of the city, towards north to happen, and happened mostly during this British period. But it's still all these areas that are going beyond this history core boundaries that existed for a long time, is still considered part of Old Dhaka. But then it slowed down a little bit when it became the capital of East Pakistan, because the attention is mostly on West Pakistan development. So Dhaka was heavily neglected. But then in 1971, when Dhaka became the capital of newly formed country, independent country Bangladesh, the rapid development started to happen. So this map here is a conjectural map. It's not really entirely based on historical records, but this is how to show that to the south of the river. So southern part of Bangladesh, they're all connected to Dhaka city by river, and then Dhaka, this old Dhaka port, maintain that prominence. So earlier I showed you the picture of that ruin, and this is a different view, backside view of it, but the front side view, if you compare with the three pictures, you can see it still exists today. But only change, you can see that since independence, there are some new development happening around it. So for many years, this is just a ruined city, but then many things have happened there. So just to again show you how Dhaka developed, and then how the concentration of development remained within the river bank. It shows those developments. So this northward direction, and then some peripheral expansion was the main trend for many years. Now, if you look at today's old Dhaka, this is roughly that area, and then you can see this old rail track. It was built around the late 19th century. And that remained the boundary of old Dhaka for a long time. Yes, they started to expand, but then somehow old Dhaka could not be integrated into a new development to the north. So, but then in the 1980s, this railroad track was removed, and then it was turned into a major road. And then the boundary of the old Dhaka started to become more blurred. But even today, we can see that Dhaka is a very multi-layer, historically multi-layered area. You can trace from it the names of the roads, the areas of neighborhoods, that there are different kinds of tradespeople lived, and then also people from different regions, different countries came to Dhaka for trading purpose. So from the French road, the Farash County means the area for the French. You have this English road, Armanitola is where the Armenians lived. So you can still find those traces. Of course, there are also built heritage that you can find, mostly from the Mughal period, but then you can also find from British, from the Armenians, and also some French structures. So when we try to understand old Dhaka, we actually see that, if you follow this World Heritage Operation guidelines, there is still a historic center that is enclosed within a modern city. But then also there are a lot of isolated urban areas. Right, now a few pictures of old Dhaka. River is still the, a very important part of the city's life, old Dhaka's life. And some of the glimpses of the old town, you can, as I said, still see remains of those different layers of history today. But again, it's a dilapidated condition is very much visible in this city. Now, there's one important aspect of the town is that while we have this kind of, the one that you're on the left-hand side, which is a government-managed heritage structure, which is a museum now. But then on the right-hand side, you see the two pictures where we have called the panchayat system, where these neighborhoods are managed by these neighborhood committees. So in this case, this is a pond which is used only by the communities who live around it, and there's a control or on access who can come here and the management of it. And various mahallas within the old part of the city still functioning as a very effective means of social management. But as I said, the dilapidation is still visible. So you can see many of these remains, many of them from the Mughal period, where the river is not too far from them. But then all this encroachment and even the riverfront is being encroached by many businesses, and gradually the river is becoming disconnected from the rest of this old Dhaka area. And it's not just the built heritage, like many places in India, we have the similar situation where we can see the very strong presence of the intangible heritage. So crafts places, there are a lot of tradespeople there, and food, and there are a lot of festivals that are that happen there. Even this area has its own special Creole. The language is a mixture of Urdu and Bengali, and which is very unique to this part of the country. So all these intangible elements together with this natural element, or river as the most the strongest one, and then the built heritage makes the city quite special. So when we try to identify the broader urban context of Old Dhaka, yes, river plays a main role, but then there are various water bodies which are part of this, like a kind of community centers. And of course, we have the built environment, which includes both historic and contemporary structures. But there are a lot of these public spaces. I mean, we are familiar with the term called chalk, small chalks and big chalks that are still, serving those social functions. And so it's a predominantly mixed use, but there are many areas still identified by the caste, that was originally associated with this, the development of these places. And there are also these trade-based neighborhoods, and Panchayat I mentioned already, and these social practices. Trade, because this has been a trading port, and still the trade, especially the wholesale trading, is one of the most prominent economic drivers of this area. Intangible heritage I mentioned, and the diversity of people. They have different people from different religions, but the majority are Hindus and Muslims. And they have this unique relationship, which has been there for.
Maybe we move on to the next presentation, and we will take up some of the discussions that he had started in the. Dr. Iman, we'll move on to the next presentation. We are a little over time, and we'll take up some of the points in the discussion, panel discussion later. So from Bangladesh to West Bengal with some similar complexities. Over to you, Bente.
I'll talk about the Serampore initiative, and I don't know if you can see that I call it a case of imperfection. So I'm going to talk about West Bengal, India, which is a very small case, especially compared to some of the really big cases we've heard about today. And it's also, as I say here, it's a case of imperfection that I wish to share with you, but it's certainly a historic urban landscape. Can you click, please? I'm not going to give you a lot of history because then I won't get time to go to my case, but it was a Danish trading town, Serampore, by the name of Frederiksnagor in 19 years from 1755 to 1845. And it was at one point called the most beautiful European town in India during that time. And here I just marked two buildings that you will see later in the PowerPoints, the church on your right and the Denmark Tavern just right of the Danish flag post. And Serampore is part of Little Europe on the Ganges, which were these European trading towns that lined the Ganges, and one of them became really, really big, which is Kolkata, which was British founded. Oops, please go back. I'll tell you when to click. Thank you. And so these European trading towns and cities line the whole Hooghly River, or Bhagirathi as it is called, but it's also Ganga, the Holy Ganga. So that's why this area has been called Little Europe on the Ganges. And they came for the same reasons as the European came to Dhaka, for textiles, especially. This wealthy Bengal textile production was the main attraction for Europeans coming to this area, which was a global trade center, world trade center before the Europeans were here. That's why they came in the first place. But Kolkata is growing. You can change the slide, please. Yeah. So one of the themes I'm going to talk about now is the space between buildings, life between buildings, which is of course very much part of urban space anywhere, very important of any urban space. But in Serampore, it's very closely linked. Life between buildings is linked to the historic buildings. So I'll mention it here, but Jan Gehl is known as an urban visionary. But I would say that most people in Serampore, they talk like he does, because he's saying the obvious, that life between buildings is even more important or as important as the building themselves. Please go on. Please, yeah. So my other point today, apart from the space between buildings, is the paragraph number 22 of the policies in the HUL recommendations, that conservation of the urban heritage should be integrated into general policy planning and practices and related to the broader urban context. Yes, but what if that's impossible? Please click. This is, of course, not always a mission impossible. We've just seen brilliant examples of planning and master planning and long-term planning, but in a town like Serampore, which is basically being swallowed up by Kolkata, which is ever growing, Serampore has become like a suburb, but also fully integrated with Kolkata. Things are happening very fast. And when we came, a small project from National Museum of Denmark and now University of Denmark of Copenhagen, we were not able to do any long-term planning, as you will see. Please click. Yes, this is the Danish planned center of Serampore in 1820s. And this is Serampore now. On the next slide, please. Yes, the left area is the one I'm going to talk about now, which was the Danish administration center of the town, which is still the historic center of Serampore, which has, of course, grown around it. The other circle on the previous slide was Serampore College, which is the second oldest modern university in Asia. The first one is in Kolkata from 1817 and Serampore College from 1818. So Serampore is certainly a historic urban landscape in many ways. But when we came in 2008-09 to do the first survey, there was a beautiful heritage building as the one you see here, which was the police station. And soon after, when we came back, it looked as on the next slide, please. Yes, this is the same place. You see not much space between the buildings, not much urban space at all, where life is supposed to be lived. So this is the situation in the historic core of Serampore, in the historic center. And just outside, next please. This is being built. So you see, as so many other places in Asian cities, that these heritage towns historic towns are under great pressure. So what could we do with our little project? We had some money for restoration. We had money for funds for documentation. And the students from Professor Jigna Desai's students from CEPT, they did great documentation. But what to do with these funds for restoration in a situation like this with no time for planning? Please click. So we basically focused on these buildings and a few more that you'll see on the Google map. Next, please. These buildings emphasized three axes: the natural river axis, where all these European villas were placed, as well as the Indian Zamindari palaces. They were a little bit more withdrawn, but Indian palaces, there was a huge Indian elite that got wealthy on the trade with the Europeans. They are also part of these townscapes. So we decided to restore one building at the riverfront. And on the other axis, click next, please. The Old Danish Church Square. And the next, please. The administrative axis going from the riverfront with the trading spot to the government house. So by restoring this building, we could emphasize these natural axes in the townscape. Please click. Yes, so this is the natural riverfront. Next, please, with the Denmark Tavern. And these are all the buildings that were, most of the buildings that were restored. There were a few others on these two axes. The Denmark Tavern, the church, the main gate, the south gate, and the Danish government house. So you see this green spot here. That's some of the few green areas in Serampore that are left. Space between buildings. Next, please. So the first move was simply to restore St. Olaf Church, because all discussions of planning and long-term planning, we could just see that it was not possible for the local urban bodies or even for the state governments that would not. There were other plans. They had taken a long time and they piled up, but they had not materialized. Furthermore, there was a little coordination between these different government bodies. So instead, we started simply restoring the church to create a vision of the potential of the area. Please, next, please. And next. We changed the whole roof. Next. And it was rebuilt in a traditional way, terracotta lime roof. Please, next. And the church had West Bengal's first UNESCO Award of Distinction for Restoration from UNESCO Asia Pacific in 2016. Next, please. And is used by the local congregation. Next, please. So our work and the UNESCO Prize naturally generated a lot of hype, and the local newspapers, they followed this intensely. So the whole thing became interesting to the local urban bodies, to the government, to the local politicians, councillors, and so on. Next, please. So talking about space between the buildings, this was the space at St. Olaf Church, which was a town square, Danish town square, and how it looked originally. And please click. This is how it looked when we came. You could hardly see the square. It was a bus terminus. But with this restoration of the church, it became interesting for the local municipality to revive an old plan. They had to build a bus terminus outside of the center. And this is what, next please. This is what the square looks like now. It's not perfect. It's plain concrete, but the space is back. The space is back for vendors, for light traffic. A few bus lines are there as well. Next, please. Our local architects who are part of our project has designed a plan which is now being selected for funding by the government of West Bengal, the state government. So hopefully it'll materialize, but at least the space is back. Please, next. Next, please, the main gate was restored. So the question is, what are these spaces for? Are they for visitors only? This is Barrackpore across the river. Next, please. Or here in Serampore, the old Danish government house being restored by the government itself. It's not perfect, and the big modern subdivisional office right next to it has come up. The government, with this restoration, they stopped building another one similar to this one. So some space was kept for these children playing here. Next, please. This is a red building, which we also restored, turned into a restaurant, a British building. Just click past it, please. Restored. Click, please. This was the riverfront before the restoration of the Denmark Tavern. Click, please. And this was the ruin of the Denmark Tavern, which we then restored at the riverfront. Next, please. This is after restoration. This tavern was recreated for the local market. Next, please. And it has restored and revived the riverfront, which nobody used. Next, please. And it has become immensely popular for people from Kolkata, from the neighboring districts, from the whole area, coming to this place because of, go one back, please. Because of this whole, it has, please stop clicking. This building, the Denmark Tavern, has generated a lot of attraction value for Serampore. It has put Serampore on the map together with the other restaurants. So people are now coming from the whole region. So that is one of the main points here, is that sometimes consider the local market before the tourist market, because these buildings are really operating well by private operators, generating an revenue. But at the same time, they have an effect on the surroundings. If you go one back, please. This little stall owner, they had their stall in front of the ruined Denmark Tavern, and they're still there because this is also commercial space for these people, for the street vendors. And now you can click the next, please. With the restoration of Denmark Tavern, the riverfront was also upgraded by the municipality. Again, it's far from perfect, but before nobody used it. Now it's full of people all the time. You can click again. And used for religious purpose. Next, please. And even safe at night. Ladies say they come here at nights now. Before they would never come even with their husbands. So this one building has had an effect on the whole area around it. Even also for the people in the next door slum. There's a slum area next to the tavern. And they really depend on this, this public space. So this is an area where people are intermingling, people of different classes. Also the people who can't afford to come to the Denmark Tavern. Next, please. This is just one of the axes recreated from ruin to a nice axis. So by restoring these buildings, everybody, not only an architect on the drawing board in the studio, can see an axis. What is a main axis? With a restored building, everybody can read the streetscape and imagine its potential. So here also the municipality upgraded the streets around the tavern. Next, please.
Bente, I'll have to request you to now.
I think we are, yes. This little space was this little square was also made by a building that was demolished by a modern building demolished by the district magistrate. Can you click, please? You can pass this. One more. Yes, here. So one back, please. We are closing now. Patchwork funding. I said that this work was the heritage restoration work was paid by us and government of West Bengal. But the main point here is all the upgrading of streets around the buildings and squares, and this bus terminus was done by different local departments, government departments, who were not part of a plan. They were absolutely not coordinated, but each of them chipped in something. The municipality, the district, the state government, different departments of the state government, all of them could suddenly read this vision for the area, even if nothing was coordinated into a master plan. So they could all contribute. Next, please. So building restoration without a master plan created a vision, and first priority to the local market before the tourist, because it's actually sustainable locally. And using private operators in these government-owned buildings, and focusing on the space between buildings for vendors, small-scale business, and recreation. That has been the lesson for us in this historic urban landscape. Thank you, Jigna, for all what you did in Serampore with your students, which I haven't had time to talk about. And we are through. This is already.
Thank you very much, Bente. Thank you for bringing in the question, the discussion on placemaking and how the buildings and the quality of buildings affect the life around the buildings. So I think it's fantastic that you brought that discussion here. I think after these 4 very insightful discussions and thought-provoking presentations, I would hand the floor to Junie Han for further panel discussion. Over to you, Junie. I look forward to a very interesting discussion from here on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jigna. A very good afternoon to all of you once again. Today's panel discussions suggested the theme. It's the urban heritage as a resource for enhancing livability. What needs to be done? Of course, this needs to be framed in relation with the historic urban landscape. Without further delay, I'd like to invite Dr. Shikha Jain to share her comment and her technical feedback and expertise, as well as her vision on the suggested theme. Dr. Jain?
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Junie Han. I was asked to comment on the Shekhawati presentation given by Mrs. Urvashi Srivastav on Shekhawati towns. Can I share the screen? Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, so I just thought, I mean, for me, it's easy to structure my recommendations as per the historic urban landscape tools, you know, so that we can really look at how the Shekhawati towns can move forward in some way. My own interaction with these towns goes as far back as 1990s, when I took this subject on Havelis of Shekhawati for my dissertation. And since then, I have been going back to these towns. And I mean, it was really a great presentation by Urvashi, which showed, you know, what is the current status. And I've been involved. I mean, I've been looking at both the government perspective as well as involved with some individual NGOs and foundations, looking at how they have taken some initiatives in these various towns. And I'm also personally involved in some ways because my husband's family actually belongs to Junjunu. So what Urvashi just showed, you know, the multiple owners and then selling your house and then, you know, going back to places just for rituals or ceremonies is something that I've experienced a lot. So these towns are really, as was presented, you know, it's really invaluable heritage, and we really need to see how these can be conserved, because with time they have really deteriorated. But since 1990s, I've seen it, like when it was completely desolate, then certain initiatives being taken up. And as was presented, you know, some of them are half-baked or some of them are getting lost with time. So if we just look at the tools of historic urban landscape recommendation, we have, as we saw in Urvashi's presentation, the knowledge is being mapped, recorded, and shared. I mean, she's done an excellent job with CATS, and there are other parallel organizations working in a similar manner on intangible heritage and other aspects of Shekhawati. So it's really progressed in that sense, but the planning tools are completely missing. And that's largely a state and local government subject that needs to be enforced. So definitely there is a more active involvement of the state and the local government that is required, both at the Shekhawati level as a whole cultural landscape, if we are looking at the 30 towns, and also individually with the local bodies of each town. Because despite being part of a larger landscape, individually they are quite diverse, and one needs to understand that aspect. If we look at the regulatory systems, again, state government has at some point or other, you know, taken initiatives. I've seen some draft heritage bylaws for the Shekhawati region being circulated, and they were even with the Haveli owners and the fort owners, and there were certain concerns. For whatever reasons, they have not been adopted or enforced. So while there have been attempts at regulatory systems, and even I think NIUA was involved in the State Hriday project of Rajasthan, where some of the Shekhawati towns were taken in. One of the examples was shown by Urvashi, where Navalgarh was mapped so well. A comprehensive heritage management plan is made, yet we don't have any enforcement or implementation of that. So these concerns, definitely, again, it's a state or local government initiative, because others have already a lot of things have happened, but now it is the point to enforce these, to adopt these, and to put them into action. Civic engagement tools, I think these are, we always underestimate, but I think they're really something that we need to enforce, and they can bring about change. They can even influence planning tools and legislation. And we have seen that happening in a lot of case studies across India as well as abroad. So this is something we've seen. I mean, whether we take the case of Shekhawati on how it came on the visible, tourist circuit or awareness at large, it started with the royal family and Castle Mandava years back, about 30 years back. But then you have other initiatives in other towns, and you always have a local catalyst. If we take the case of Ramgarh, where Shruti Nada Podar has, because the family belongs to her, the place belongs to her father's family, she has gone back, done one Haveli, then added 3-4 more, and she's working with the women in the villages. We have the example of Momasar, where, foundations have taken up initiative for this festival, again, by a person who belongs to Momasar. Then there are Haveli owners who have taken this initiative. The Morarka Foundation is one example. In case of Khetri, which is one of the 30 towns, you see the Vivekanand Trust, which has taken this initiative. So I think in each of these places, there is an NGO, a foundation, which is quite active. And that is how we need to generate, larger awareness. And this is what has really created a difference in whichever towns I have seen till now. So this is something we even need to enforce further or enhance and associate with the local people in this manner. Financial tools, this is something that I feel the state government is very limited in its vision, because they're largely looking at it as a tourism circuit. And there is nothing beyond that, as one is looking at, for revenue generation, for socio-economic upliftment of the place. You may have rare examples where Morarka Foundation is looking at a wider setting or agricultural produce from the place. Shruti, who I mentioned earlier, again, her foundation is also trying to work with the villagers around and the local people. But what I found in the last 2 years, and especially with the COVID, and this is my personal observation, I found that homeowners, even who are staying in places like Gurgaon, like this is an example of my office manager who has a Haveli in one of the small towns, Tamkur, and they spent at least, most of the lockdown back in Tamkur in a Haveli which they had not visited for years, which used to lie locked. But because of the situation, they realized that this is where they're getting fresh vegetable. It is safe. It is, fresh air, and it's a much healthier place to live in. And within 2 years, I've seen this change, and people going back to their, original Haveli. And this is, them celebrating Diwali for the first time after they got married in their Haveli in Tamkur. So I think we need to really look at more sustainable solutions where homeowners who've abandoned those places, it's not just one situation where they're looking at converting it into a heritage hotel, but there are more sustainable solutions that we need to look at, where people and the locals and their socio-economic situation needs to be evaluated. So these are the few points from my end, and specifically focusing on the tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jain. I think from your sharing comment, I'd like to recall that in the session 2, we also talked about the enforcement of legislation. And lots of things happening in India, for example, but they do not come to a kind of enforcement or even the materialization of the act. So I think this is something maybe all of you attending here, academics, maybe should take it and really drive into the materialization. And another point is that you mentioned the civic engagement. I mean, as we all know, this is one of the 4 tools which the UNESCO Historic Urban Landscape recommend the cities to take, along with the planning tool and regulatory systems, and then financial. So thank you very much, Shika, for sharing this wonderful and then very interesting experience, and also the technical views. Now I would like to invite Dr. Johannes Widodo from Singapore to share her expertise and experience and on the presentation made today.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Well, I don't have PowerPoint. I just want to highlight some of the things that listening to all the presentations from the first case until the fourth case, that there's 2 things that come out in the mind, especially in relation to Penang as well. The first is the certainty of changes. Everything changed, like time, like history. Everything is moving forward. But yet, the so-called OU fee that is used as the basis for inscriptions for the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and also even the HUL mechanism that is proposed in 2011, is something that is not so nimble, but it's very stiff sometimes. So if UOV change, if the climate change, if the demographic change, so how is the mechanism that we need actually to monitor this? So probably we need to think about something like agile HUL, dynamic HUL, or the importance of periodic reviews, or even to the OUV itself. So this is one thing. And the second is about tourism. We are talking about this, what's happening in Penang, for example, very much dependent, also even the pandemic, and people complaining there's not enough tourists and to sustain the local economy. So I like in one slide that Sika mentioned just now, is about beyond tourism. I think we need to think even more than just using tourism as an exploitative way in the cultural resources. And one of the questions posed to me and then to the panelists in this discussion is about livability. So I think probably we need to rethink also about how and what is the purpose of HUL. Is the HUL for the purpose of tourism? Is it for the purpose of economic developments for somebody else? Or it should be directly to the residents, to the people, the local community. Should it be related directly to this UN 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Growth and Development Goals? So the way to go forward is we are talking about the sustainable tourism, something related to ecosystem and ecology, like ecotourism, something related to responsible tourism, something related to developmental tourism. So these things has been addressed quite deeply in different forums, but I think it needs to be really integrated with the mechanism of HUL, HIA, and AIC. So all these mechanisms should be based on the focus on the well-being and the benefit of the local people, not for tourists. So that is something that strikes in my mind. That is the example for Serampore, for example, because I was in the jury panel on UNESCO Asia Pacific Award when we selected that project. And we are deeply understand about the importance of how to restore not the buildings, but the life itself. So the focus really how to restore happiness to the local population, how to give fulfillment of the needs of the local residents, how to refocus to wellness, not wealth. So seriously, I think we need to examine also that the implementation of HUL and even HIA, whatever, by the state party or by all the stakeholders, should be shifted with a different mindset. The mindset is ethical mindset, empathetical mindset, and mindset that is really focused on the local population and the growth of local economy. So I just want to give a very short, like a comments and a general remark. I just want to quote Mahatma Gandhi when he said that Earth provides enough for every man's needs, but not every man's greed. So the need and greed is directly related to the purpose of why we are trying to restore something, why we want to conserve, and why we want to manage change. So the management of change in the terms of conservation is what is the purpose of that. And we shall remember that heritage, urban heritage, of course, is the resources. But who has the right over that resources? Sometimes you just think that the right is belong to us, our generations. But actually it's not. Our cultural heritage, natural heritage, is belong to the future generations. So we have no right actually to exploit that or to finish or to destroy our resources for the sake of greed, for the sake of our contemporary economic needs. So therefore, I think it's very important to come back to the basic. And when you are celebrating the 10th anniversary of HUL, I think we need to really think about ethics and how this ethics should be the main driving force of the next development of HUL. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Widodo. I think you talked through lots of important questions and ideas to all of us. And yes, I think as you rightly mentioned, I think I was thinking during your talk that maybe this HUL approach, UNESCO recommendation, the urban landscape, may be really a tool for this 21st century, because we know that this is a very open actually tool for city development while keeping the heritage alive and then conserving the heritage elements. And we know that this is not to curb change, but to accompany cities to better cope with the change. So I think we have, this whole approach has lots of potential, especially in Asia, where the cities has a huge challenge to accommodate the mass migration, while they also have to make their even historic towns very much the livability. And second thing, I also would like to comment that you mentioned that the purpose of all this conservation, and it would be maybe important that to mention that World Heritage Convention actually, from the very beginning, it stipulates that heritage should be given a role for the people's life, to betterment of people's life. So I think at the end, we all converge into the same point, same goal, which is the people's well-being. So thank you very much for this philosophical talk. And I'd like to invite now Ms. Olga Chepelianskaya. Olga, are you there?
Yes,
connected
yes.
with us?
Yes,
thank you very much. Very good to see you.
Yes, pleasure is for me. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts at this extremely important event. I'm glad to be joining you from the Dubai Expo, where we look in detail into how do we build today. And this is in fact a topic I would like to touch upon in relation to heritage, and share a couple of thoughts of how do we go further to activate the role that heritage can actually play in cities, so that cities can benefit from it fully. So there are two major points that I would like to take the opportunity to look at today. One is a holistic approach to heritage revival, and the second one is the integration between heritage and the new urban fabric. So to start with the first point on the holistic approach to heritage revival, I would like to share the experience of a city I worked with as part of ISOCARP, and this is the city of Suzhou in China. I will share my screen. I do not have PowerPoints, but I have prepared a couple of visuals which we can look at together. So we were invited to Suzhou, a number of international experts, to look into how to reactivate the interest for the Panmen Gate in the old Suzhou town, which is a tower built in the 14th century. At least it was built earlier, but the latest remains are of 14th century, which the government of Suzhou was finding is not getting sufficient attention because it is located at the corner of the historical town. So while we looked at it, we realized that if we want to bring visitors only to this tower, it may be difficult because the Suzhou Gardens are on the north side of the city. This is complete south. And it would just be difficult to get the attention the city wanted unless there are tourist buses which come, take a picture and go, which is what was happening at the time. We, however, realized that just across the Panmen Gate, was lying the Sulin industrial area, which was a traditional weaving fabric located there for about a century and abandoned. And so this entire site was completely inactivated. It was actually quite nice infrastructure, but nothing was happening there. And just across the Panmen Gate, across the Grand Canal, was lying the Panmen village, which was built by the efforts of the city in the style of traditional Suzhou small houses, but again, it was meant to be restaurants and activities. Again, it was just laying vacant. So what we did here after several days of intense work is we created a proposal where we would integrate this entire area together for a set of activities where both locals and visitors could participate, wherein we would utilize the unused buildings for local people to better experience and understand the history and the biodiversity of the Grand Canal, and for visitors also to come in and enjoy this. And we would also have activities for local people. We realized actually this area is quite a vibrant student area with a number of universities located there, and also a number of elderly living here. So we thought that specific activities could be dedicated to the elderly, to the students, so students could have science labs exploring biodiversity. The elderly could do some activities, traditional activities related to this place, including weaving. So what we learned from this experience is that for us sometimes to give the heritage its due value and its due role, we need to look a bit broader. The specific building and look into how we can create an integrated experience, which is what people look for more today. So this is just one example that I wanted to share. I don't know how I can stop sharing. Maybe if someone, yes, I think I found it. So this is one experience, and the learning was that we do need to look beyond. The second point I want to make is integrating heritage and new urban fabric. So often what happens in my experience with Indian cities is when one wants to visit heritage areas, to access them, one needs to break through quite an unfriendly urban fabric for accessibility reasons, but also the way it is built is actually not designed for you to have an experience. It's designed for you to go through and quickly reach the area where you actually want to have an experience. And this looking at how cities are doing in terms of visitors, in terms of tourism, of course, looking at before COVID, now situation is temporarily a bit different. Cities which do best tend to provide that integrated experience. To just give you an example, which to me, when I came across it, was quite mind-opening. The city and country of Singapore receives more international visitors than the entire India. So Singapore has only one World Heritage Site. India has 35 or 37. I don't want to be mistaken, but in this range. And for me, one of the explanations lies in the fact that in Singapore, you have a very seamless experience. The heritage areas are very nicely connected to new areas. You can just walk from one area to another. You take the metro and you reach in the heart of Chinatown, and then 10 minutes later, you can be somewhere else. And everywhere is an experience. It's not that only in heritage areas you actually experience something. So this poses the question of how do we build today if we want cities to have this unique value and to create this attraction for both the locals and the visitors into the future. And here I would like to share the example of Doha in Qatar, where I was just last week. In fact, it's been a while that we at Unicity have been looking at this project I want to share about, which is the downtown Doha Regeneration. So the Qatar Foundation spent 3 years with a number of experts from Qatar and from abroad, analyzing what is the essence of the architectural language of the place in heritage, but also as it wants to be projected today. So basically not only the historical language, architectural language, but also how do we blend it with today's needs and today's aspirations. So this was a long research, 3 years were taken to do this. And as a result of this research, guidelines were elaborated for all the architects and stakeholders who were invited to contribute to building the downtown Doha area. So it's only a few kilometers, and I will share my screen again to try and show you a few visuals of it. So yeah, so if you see, this is the area that was nearly entirely redeveloped. A few heritage buildings were kept, but essentially most of the buildings were dating back to the 50s and 60s, and the government just decided to remove them and rebuild the area just next to the old area of Souq Waqif and next to the seashore. So here, what is interesting is you see a little bit at the backside of, you know, on the other side of the bay, you see the contemporary high rises there, which was the previous trend of building in Doha. And so all of that was put into question. And these guidelines provided elements of what was in line with the local context and what was in line with the unique architectural language of the place. So for example, you see a very compact town, which is not so much in use for Qatar citizens in general who live quite spread out and who use cars extensively. So this is now going back to compact towns that traditionally were built because of the climate, of very hot climate, where you need shading of buildings, you know, which buildings provide to one another. Again, this is not a very green area because of the very dry climate. So therefore trees were not much of an option, but this way of building actually contributes to making the place cooler. In addition, looking at the wind direction, which was coming from the seashore, the area was built in a way that wind actually crosses the area and naturally cools it down. Now, if you look a little bit at the elements, so you can see that one can discuss the success of this experience. Here, what is interesting is really the approach. So some parts of it you can see are relatively modern. Some other parts take inspiration from the mosaics that were used traditionally, the jalis here. So that creates that kind of a connect with the earlier urban fabric. And then sustainability also comes from the fact that you build in line with the local context and you tend to use less air conditioning because you already provided natural cooling. By the way, just very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I learned that China now is going to control high-rise development. So in all the cities with less than 3 million people, buildings should not be taller than 150 meters. And this is a huge breakthrough because what happens is that when we want to build a unique urban fabric, the higher we go, the less we have the choice of materials, the less we have the choice of local designs, the less we have the opportunity to involve local artisans, which can create this unique visual value of a place. So China, a place which has been developing quite dramatically over the last years, is taking consciousness of these elements. And it would be really interesting for me, who spent almost 10 years in India, to also see similar discussions and trends on how do we bring out the uniqueness of Indian cities, which are so diverse when we look at the map of India and the different cultures that India embeds. How do we build today in a way that this uniqueness comes to light and supports the value of heritage? And so to conclude, I would like to speak quickly about the city of Chanderi in India, in which I had the chance to work with the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage within TAC, which still has this unique value of having over 70% of the urban fabric as heritage buildings. This is very rare in India. Most of the times you would just have punctual buildings here and there. Of course, also due to the fact that the legislation protecting buildings in India, both at national and state level, only covers about 8,000 buildings for the entire country, which is very less. So as per assessments of INTAC, over 99% of actual built heritage remains unprotected. And when I visited Chanderi for this project, I actually saw myself buildings 300 years old being demolished in front of my eyes, because people do not see value in them, but they want concrete boxes which correspond to their aspirations. But nevertheless, as of now, there is still this great value of that holistic approach, where you can wander through the city and you experience heritage in this totality. However, the challenge that we noticed with this heritage experience, two main challenges were: one, the integration of Chanderi into the region. The road to reach is extremely hard. There are almost no buses. There is a train station, maybe a couple of hours drive away, and the road is very bad. Public buses are very rare. So as a result, it limits very much the interaction between the local citizens and the rest of the state, and vice versa. Visitors do not have sufficient access to experience the place. This limits opportunities for local citizens, because many of you may know Chanderi is a place where traditionally silk was woven and traditional saris were woven with handlooms. And these people depend very much on middlemen, because it's difficult for them to just get out and propose their products more directly. And visitors, not only access is an issue, but also the entire infrastructure. I think there was only one hotel when I visited, that was 4 years ago. They were building a few more hotels, not so much in line with the idea of the city, because they were big hotels built on the outskirts rather than small places where one could experience the heritage within the city. But this is just to highlight the idea that the way forward is also a better integration of heritage places into not only within the city, which we discussed with the example of Doha, but also within a certain surface, a certain region, so that the city becomes more accessible both ways for the locals and for the citizens. So to sum up, I believe it's critical to have a holistic approach to heritage revival. It is equally critical to integrate the new urban fabric with the old urban fabric, so that we don't end up with just a few places to be visited and the rest of the city not being interesting to visitors and not being attached to locals. And three, integrate better the heritage areas into the overall region so that they can play their role better.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olga. In spite of the condition you are traveling, we very much appreciate your accommodating. I think you pointed out the three very essential aspects in the urban development and the planning. But I understand that the Ms. Gurmeet Ray need to leave quite soon. So without further delay, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Ray. Ms. Ray, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Juni. I'm delighted to be on this platform. And I did get a brief from you to speak about Serampore, but I'll have to extend myself to, because all the presentations were so brilliant and they all create a certain context for us to have this dialogue about HUL. And, one thing I would like to, and I hope you'll find me politically correct in the comments I may make here. What came out very strongly here, when I look at the landscape of Shekhawati, the kind of built heritage we're talking about. Now, let me put this in context. We're talking about HUL after 10 years. And we're talking about sustainable development goals. So clearly, sustainable development goals are a much wider framework. And we're trying to look at HUL through that framework than look at SDGs through the HUL framework. So I would rather look at HUL from the SDG framework here, because that's more recent. This is what we are all aspiring for. So when I look at the kind of presentation, the kind of situations that have been shared, and I look at Shekhawati, clearly migration has happened. The privileged, now when we, as by virtue of being cultural heritage practitioners, we tend to talk about people, but our lens is still the same thing. Our lens is material culture. In India, we are looking at material culture, which actually belongs to the privileged and not to the underprivileged. When we're looking at intangible heritage, those practices are more in the domain of the economically lesser privileged people. So we have to understand that we're looking at a very, very diverse group of people. We are trying to be inclusive. We're trying to look at cultural heritage, but we all say we need to look at social, cultural, and economic development. So cultural heritage in itself cannot be inclusive. What I would say is that, can cultural heritage be leveraged to achieve inclusive economic development? Now, the word inclusive and economic development is what I would, after 30 years of practicing in the sector, I think we need to paraphrase our sentences. For instance, in case of Shekhawati, the privileged have moved out. The material culture is of the privileged who now we want to restore that. But what is happening to the people who are living there? Now, one aspect I know about that area is that there are several settlements, and I'm happy to stand corrected if I've got factual inaccuracies here, is that men folk have left in several areas, have gone to the Middle East to earn, for their family. They've left women behind. Now, we are talking about a changed landscape, and I completely endorse the viewpoint of Johannes here, that the paradigm needs to shift. When we look at Sirampur, we're looking at a colonial legacy, and I don't mean it badly. We're looking at colonial built heritage, but we want to decolonize our cultural narrative. We want to, and I'm very happy to kind of hear what was being said by Bente, that we want to recover public space. Now, recovering public space is not a colonial historical cultural narrative. Recovering public space is a decolonized narrative. Similarly, when we talk about Dhaka, we saw that Grand Gate, and I'm sorry, Amon, that one kind of couldn't hear part of your presentation, but when I looked at those two images, and we see the image of the 19th century, you have this Grand Gate and you have homes of people or shops of people built of materials which were more perishable. And then today, if we see the same houses, they are built of much better, more, kind of comfortable houses, materials by the standards of the local community, which means on indicators, on economic indicators, they are doing financially better than what they possibly were doing 100 years ago. I mean, that's my reading on the surface of it. Penang, I love Penang. And I love what they have done in terms of the institutional structures. The work of the Aga Khan Trust, the work of Think City, the work of the new institutional structure that they've created of Georgetown Conservation and Development Corporation. Now, they've created an institutional structure which can now deconstruct the colonial legacy. It can deconstruct if I were to position that within the Indian situation, I would say something like that would deconstruct the legacy of the bureaucrats and the politician, which is an kind of a platform to include more people in the narrative of revitalization, inclusiveness, and improved quality of life of people. So, I mean, I think we need, within the HUL framework, what Johanna said, I couldn't agree more, that we need more inclusive economic tools. We need more inclusive ecological tools. And that is something, and clearly, I mean, HUL provides for many, many aspects. And I think maybe we need to revisit some of these aspects from within the framework of Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you so much.
I'd like to ask you whether you would have any questions to one of the speakers.
You know, I definitely would like to have side conversations. But I mean, I was very happy to hear all that I heard. It was very enriching, and I would like to congratulate everybody for the wonderful work that they're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gurmeet. Yes, no, definitely. I think, of course, within the HUL, and then, of course, when we talk about city, we have to engage very much with the civil society and with residents, but of course the government, with everybody together. For example, in terms of inclusivity, maybe I can give a very good example. One of the HUL approach, for example, in Bologna, it now has become a very famous case. Bologna is also a European medieval city. Its original initial historic town was, mapped by the medieval period of wall. So when you see the map, this historic town, initial historic town was very much visible. Now, officially, this historic town has been enlarged because when the city of Bologna applied the HUL, UNESCO Historic Urban Landscape approach, and when they engaged with the residents and the citizens about their perception on the city, on their historic cities, and then the result was that they perceived the historic town, not only medieval part, but much larger context. So the result is that now the historic town of Bologna is much larger, embracing the 19th and even 20th centuries, the elements. So I think this is the, as I mentioned before, this is the the strong power of the HUL approach, which can really provide the cities to be inclusive when the cities are initiating the civic engagement tool approach. So I'd like to maybe invite a bit interaction before we wrap up this session 3. Our panelists, Shika and Olga, and Dr. Widodo, if you have any further question that you'd like to ask to our presenter.
I think, like Gurmeet, I would just like to compliment all the presenters. I think this was a very diverse case study and a lot of learning for Indian cities. So I found all of them very interesting, and not only this session, but of course the previous ones and how it is continually linking. And I think this one specifically is very important because while there is more urbanization pressure in our bigger cities, in these small historic towns, we can still see, that the heritage is quite intact, and there are, elements or attributes of historic urban landscape that can show role models with a proper approach. So I found all the presentations very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shika. Dr. Widodo, would you like to comment further or questions on the presentation made today?
No, I don't think it's necessary to have a questions because it's quite interesting presentation and it's quite comprehensive. And I'm happy that HUL has become a movement. It's not just obligations, but still the problem is on the mindset of the state parties and also in this, especially also the stakeholders, that the very legalistic approach sometimes doesn't really give benefits to the real population and community. And,
thank you very much.
And second, I think is most important is how we try as UNESCO, UNICEF, or whatever this international organization is to help the weakest parties in these equations, which is the local communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Olga, I'm sure you would like to comment further or even questions.
Thank you very much, Junki. So unfortunately, because of meetings, I did not get a chance to listen to all the presentations, but what I got a chance to hear, I agree with the other panelists that it's very valuable, and I'm grateful that these experiences are shared and the learnings we can get from these experiences. I would also like to highlight that I find this great that this webinar is co-organized with NIUA, because this is exactly going in the direction of stakeholders involved into today's development, coming into the heritage side and looking into how heritage and today's development can be integrated, which I feel is an extremely essential point. So thank you so much for having me here at this very important event.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Maybe, yes, maybe it's time to wrap up. From UNESCO-New Delhi side, of course, I feel that today's sessions, if I should formulate a keyword for today's, it would be maybe civic engagement and local community and the involvement of residents. And in India, we have already excellent cases. For example, I was really impressed in Mumbai when I saw, you know, the resident of the World Heritage Site part formulated themselves as a foundation and really worked together with the municipality. And I also understand in Jaipur now is civil engagement is getting very strong. And things can happen. And then I remember during the last session, Jigana mentioned maybe in 10 years ago, we did not talk about urban landscape. And it is true that in 50 years ago, the historic town was not considered as a heritage. And now everybody consider it is heritage, and then people are very much proud that India has now 2 historic cities, which is one Ahmedabad, and then second one is Jaipur. By the way, when the Olga mentioned, commented, that there was one thing I also would like to provide further information to the audience. India by today, by this year, has 40th World Heritage Site. So today's day, the last Ramappa temple from Telangana, and then Dholavira archaeological city from Gujarat. So I think today, like the previous sessions, the session was extremely interesting. I also myself learned so many things because I'm not from this region, and then it was really excellent occasion to learn more about cities in this region, which has extreme diversity and then richness. So I'd like to mention to the audience that our final edition will be Thursday, 18 November, at same time. And thank you so much for all the presenters today, and then as well as the panelists today, and all the staff who helped technically for the session. Thank you very much.